Here we are again. I had a lot of requests to talk about the Ruger 77, which is an excellent rifle, and I'm happy to be making this video. But before I begin, maybe some of you saw my Verndl Jaeger rifle video, and I mentioned I was getting ammunition from 1888, and finally it arrived. So I don't have the carbine in front of me, but this is the ammunition for the Verndl. And some of you mentioned that the carbine uses different ammunition from the rifle, and of course that's true. And in this case, the fellow selling me ammunition was confused and sold me for the rifle, which I kind of expected, but that's fine. Anyway, I just thought I'd show you what ammo. It came in these stripper clips, believe it or not. It's in pretty good shape. It's got the paper patch, which is the white line, and it's got that unusual case configuration. It's a brass, and then it has a rim, and then it has an extra elevated surface for the primer, which is there are other cartridges like that. Anyway, we'll go back to the Verndl on another video, but today's video is on the Ruger Model 77. So the people wanted to know the main differences between the Hawkeye, which disassembled looks like this, and then the original Tang model, which looks like this. So we'll talk about the Tang safety model. So you can see it has a safety button on a Tang, and the Hawkeye does not. The Hawkeye safety is in the bolt. And when I took apart the Tang safety model, first thing that happened was I took it out of the stock, and it probably won't happen now, but this little transfer bar is not retained by anything, so it kind of lifts out and falls out, and then once the transfer bar falls out, the safety button itself falls out. Now these parts would all be captured in their proper places by the stock. Nevertheless, I can see why Ruger shifted to the Hawkeye system. So we have the more complex investment casting on the original Ruger, and we have the Tang safety, and we have a trigger which is more complex than the trigger on the Hawkeye. It's always hard to arrange all these things so that they are as visible as possible. But there you can see the two different actions, and I'm wondering how I can set this down. You can see that there are some things in the original investment casting that they've simplified on the Hawkeye. And if you have time, it's very interesting to read how investment castings work, which I've mentioned before is an ancient process, which used to be called the lost wax process, and there are ancient statues that are made the same way. Anyway, Bill Ruger wanted to make a high quality bolt action rifle, but look at all the milling operations that would be necessary, including this hanger for the trigger. So when he first made the Ruger 77, he thought of ways to get around the expenses that resulted in the pre-64 Model 70 turning into the post-64 Model 70 Winchester, which was a very complex action to mill out, just like the Mauser. So it's always cost saving, and obviously was a very smart man and figured out that this can be accomplished with investment casting. So these surfaces are actually casting surfaces. There is some finishing, some milling that's been done here, and of course to create the dovetails for the scope base, which you get with the rifle, which is a bit of a saving. Anyway, investment casting, an excellent way of making a complicated part without doing all kinds of milling. And some people were asking me, or I had a couple of messages, what does milling mean? So if you're not familiar with milling, maybe you're familiar with working with routers, like wood routers, and it's a machine. It doesn't look like a router at all, but it's a machine that is able to remove steel, and there are hundreds of different cutters that fit into milling machines, but you could make this action out of a block of steel, and by drilling holes and milling you could end up with this exact action, but there'd be a whole pile of metal shavings and potentially even lathe work and so on. So an investment casting saves a lot of trouble. Also, investment casting creates the part very close to the final shape, and so some people have told me that the molecular structure of the steel is oriented in such a way that it's stronger. I don't know. I think the actions are very strong either way. But here's the original 77. Typical trigger. The Hawkeye is simpler. As you know, I like simpler. And you can't beat the Hawkeye safety. So you can see that when you flip this over, you're actually physically blocking the striker. Like this is a fantastic safety. And at the same time, this part is rotating and blocking the trigger. So you can see the trigger could move there, and once you cock the action, rotate the safety, you now have blocked the trigger, and you've completely blocked the striker, sorry. And then on the original model, I have not taken this apart, maybe once long ago, to see what's what with the trigger, but this is the safety in here, and it's not blocking the striker. It's in all likelihood blocking the sear, so the trigger can't move. And you know, on some simple designs, the safety just blocks the physical trigger from moving backwards, but that's not really affecting the mechanism. So I think the Hawkeye safety is excellent. You can see the bolts are very similar. The bolt handle, there was a lot of discussion when the Model 77 came out, you know, is this a nice bolt handle? I don't know. It definitely works. Maybe there are nicer ones, maybe there are uglier ones. The Hawkeye again has a slightly simplified investment casting. We have to get this like that, and you can see the configuration in the back of the action. Doesn't seem dramatically different, but these would all be significant changes, and I guess we've got a little bit more weight in here in the Hawkeye casting. And a lot of people, when I mention this to them, don't believe that it is a casting, but it is. It's not a machined action. And the Model 77 remains, especially the Hawkeye, one of the best rifles, period. This model is in 300 Winchester Magnum. This one is in 35 Wayland. This is 2017, and actually it came with a very nice walnut stock. So this stock goes with the original, and it's a typical you know, drop-in fit. So that's what the rifle looks like. The original 77, slightly different because there's no safety, but that's it. Function is typical bolt action, and removing and replacing the bolt is easy. I mean, it's quite a bit like a Mauser. You can see this here. And this is a Ruger quarter rib, and then the front sight is on a band. It's a banded front sight, which is a nice feature. And I guess Bill Ruger had sort of African Express rifles in mind with some of the models, and they look that way. And the walnut is always straight grain, made properly. I've got the floor plate out, of course, and this is the floor plate from the early model, and I checked it with a magnet, so this is aluminum. And then the trigger guard on the original model is also aluminum. The magazine box is steel, and it's retained by 3 screws. And the screws on the original model are slot screws. And then shifting to the Hawkeye, magazine box, floor plate, sort of engraved there, laser engraved or something, and the trigger guard. And I checked these with a magnet, and these are steel. You need an Allen key to take apart the Hawkeye, but it's no big deal. So they got away from the slot screws, which is not a bad idea. a lot of people have trouble getting the right size screwdriver and mark up the slot screws. This is that safety transfer bar and the safety button from the original. And the last thing I'll mention is that this is 35 Whelen or Whelen, depending on how you want to pronounce it, in the Hawkeye. And it came with that walnut stock I was just mentioning. And I went out and picked up one of these, and you'll probably, some people will probably laugh. A lot of people call them these the boat paddle stock. And a lot of people thought they're so ugly that they took them off their Rugers right away. And I was happy they did that, because I went out and bought them whenever I saw them. Because this may not be attractive to some people. I think it's fine. But what a tough, excellent stock. And I've seen a couple of enterprising younger people make these panels out of walnut. They may have done that at the factory too. Anyway, you can go online, and some people make replacement panels. But if you want to go, you know, in a canoe or whatever, take your boat paddle stock, and I think it's excellent. And they're very cheap because everybody took them off, and there's sometimes at the gun shows there are 3 or 4 in a rack for minimal cost. Other than that, they have the angled anchor screw here, so this fits in here rather this way, and the action is pulled in at an angle. I don't want to force it in. I did anyway. And so it's a little different from the Mauser and others, which are just a straight screw. But I never was able to determine that that's a huge advantage. And the trigger pull, a lot of people like to talk about that, and I have to say the Hawkeye has a superior trigger to the original. There's no creep or over travel, very little. And it's set at, actually it's set a little bit higher. I don't have my trigger gauge here, but it's, I forget what it was, 6 or 7 pounds, which is actually still light. A lot of the manufacturers, for legal reasons, set their triggers quite heavy. Anyhow, that is it for the Ruger 77 Hawkeye and the original Ruger with the Tang safety. I can't see this as a big impairment. Oh, by the way, I should mention, whenever these show up and people need help with something, I simply take a strong pair of pliers after this is installed, and I just squeeze the ends to expand them so that this becomes a captive part. It just falls out always because there's nothing preventing this from moving. So I just squeeze it and create a little butterfly here shape, and then it's held in place. So that is it. I can't think of anything else. Major accuracy, I have to say, excellent. This 35 Whelen is remarkably accurate. Same with the 300 Win Mag. A lot of times the rifles that are chambered for the big cartridges, big bullets, like a 9.3 by 62 or 35 Whelen, which is close, they tend to shoot quite accurately, or more accurately than one would expect. And now this one didn't come with iron sights, is the last thing. And compared to the American, which is a more modern firearm at much lower cost, the Hawkeye has a lot more features and a lot more quality, which is what you would expect. But if you wanted the synthetic stock, it's there too. This one doesn't have the iron sights, too bad, but you don't get everything. Anyhow, that's it. Thanks for watching.